Hi, Chris Schweizer here again, and I am doing another of these video production journals for what I have been calling Paradise Square. At this point, the title is tentatively changing. Uh, at the suggestion of my agent, Charlie Olson, I moved the focus of the narrative from being an ensemble piece to having one clear protagonist. And that protagonist is a character named Baby-Faced Willie, who is the leader of a gang called the Baxter Street Dudes. That being the case, I wanted to both give a clear sense of the locale and also the fact that it is about one character. Since Willie is a playwright, I have taken to calling the project The Bard of Baxter Street. Whether that will remain the title, I am not entirely sure, but for now, it seems the most appropriate name to affix to the project. So I'll continue to call these the Paradise Square production journals, but that's what I'm calling the book, Bard of Baxter Street. At least for now. The publisher that it lands with has other ideas for something that either better suits the narrative or that is more likely to elicit interest or sales, then I will certainly be amenable to that. So, as I said last time, I had the plot pretty much worked out. So there have been a few changes to the outline, but not very many. And I am very happy with where the outline is now. I feel like I could run with it. And as I said, it's pretty loose. It's probably, maybe 2 pages tops. I used to do much tighter outlines for a book that was going to be about 200 pages. I would do, anywhere from a 10 to a 15-page outline. And now I really value the opportunity to allow the characters to dictate the direction of the plot. So I have a clear general through line as to what I want the story to be, but how it plays out, I want to leave as nebulous as possible so that as I'm working on the story really tells itself more than trying to hit the points that I've previously established. So I started working on sample pages. And sample pages are always a little bit tricky. You just grab something from the middle of the book or somewhere in the book, something that showcases the tone, something that showcases how the dialogue plays out, the pacing, what the aesthetic is going to be. And so ideally I want something that at any given point will have both a conversational aspect and also a hint of how I will handle an action sequence. And so I started roughing these out on the computer. I've been doing my pencils on the computer more and more these days because I build everything around my word balloons. The composition is reliant entirely on the where word balloon placement is, how big they are, that sort of thing. And since I'm doing my dialogue, 95% digitally now, thanks to a font created from my lettering, created by Eric Newsom, I now can work these out in the computer and then I sort of build around them. And as such, my pages are pretty tight, and this is something I'm going to get to in a little while. They're pretty jam-packed with stuff. So I did these sample pages. I did these pencils, and I printed them out on my little letter-sized laser printer. And what I usually do with pages, this is the first time I've not done this. What I've always done with pages has been to print out my pencils in very light blue on an inkjet, and then do my ink on top of that. I like the aesthetic on the original art of being able to see the ink over the top of the pencils. I think there's something educational about it that I always treasured as a reader and as an up-and-coming cartoonist, and so I feel like I want to make that aesthetic available to anybody who might be interested in it. But that's not necessarily the best way to approach stuff. You know, comics are a medium for whom the end goal is the only import. You know, what it looks like when it's printed, that's what matters. If your originals are a mess, if you do them half digitally and half originally, if you don't have the pencil showing, whatever it might be, those should not factor, those elements should not factor into questions of production. At least I don't believe that they should, because the art, what you're creating, is the book. And so whatever best services the book, even if it runs counter to how you like your originals to look, is the direction that you need to go. So I have been more and more often doing drawings by light boxing the pencils, having the pencils and using a light box. If you're not familiar with a light box, I've got it in the other room, but I won't leave and come back. It's just a plastic box with fluorescent lights inside, shines up. You can trace on top of something if your paper isn't too thick. So what I did was I printed up my pencils, and you can see them on the back here. You can't actually see the pencils, but I'll run them through. And they are taped together, and then I put it on the light box, and then I ink over the top of that. So you no longer have pencils, but you do have inks. And this, the best thing about this approach is that it allows me to deviate more comfortably from the pencils than I used to. As I tighten my pencils, I find myself beholden to them, and I want my inks to be their own thing. I want them to dictate certain aspects of the drawing, and so with the light box, it's easier to free myself up to use the pencils as the basis, but not treat them as a rigid pattern into which to put the inks. So I did this with a few pages. It starts with the main character, Willie, stealing a bunch of different fabric swatches from a sweatshop, and seeing a character below who is being dragged in. A lot of these kids are sort of put into a position of more or less indentured servitude. So she's trying to escape. Willie allows himself to drop onto the foreman, and the characters escape. So through that, I get my action sequence. I also get to hint at what I had mentioned last time, which is something that I'm really excited to play with this, which is the using the comics medium to add diagrams, to add labels, to add that sort of thing, to better communicate the state in which these kids live, the scammy stuff especially. So through there, the characters go down into the basement, and then I have a big full panel shot that shows the whole theater and all its different aspects. And here are the inks for that. So you can see I removed his eyelids in that first panel. I was trying to make him look really casual, and he just kind of looked sleepy, and I wanted him to convey that enthusiasm. So I'm still doing a few tweaks here and there digitally before moving to this. Now, I knew that I wanted this book to have a watercolor aesthetic for a couple of reasons. One, I don't really, though I don't mind digital coloring at all, I don't like being able to see the digital brushwork and things. It's just an aesthetic choice. Digital painting, pre-Kyle Webster brushes always jumped out at me as being digital painting. Digital coloring, where you've got especially sort of more gestural stuff with a lower opacity, It's just never really scratched that visual itch that I want when I'm looking at coloring. But I know that there are going to be a lot of blended colors in this, mostly because they're running around in mud all day. They're dirty. The stones are half covered by, the paving stones are half covered by dirt and manure and mud and everything else. And so there's going to be a lot of colors shifting in and out of each other. And that's very difficult for me to do digitally in a way that creates an aesthetic that I like. And so I tried a number of different approaches to doing it, to doing the work with watercolor. Here is one page that I did watercolored by hand. So there's a few difficulties with this. One, using watercolor paper that I like, either Bristol or sort of a toothier watercolor paper, I cannot ink on top of it the way that I like. I like to ink really fast. I move my lines across the page as swiftly as the pen permits me. And the pen permits me to do so far more with a slicker, sort of intended for printing paper. I use a Hammermill 100-pound cover stock. So this is the paper that I ink on. And as you can see, or whoops, as you can hear, it's pretty slick. This is, whoops, clearly grainier. So when I try to ink on that, I don't like my ink lines. They break up, they lose a lot of their energy and spontaneity. So the solution to that is to scan and do my inking on this paper and then scan it and print it on another kind of paper that better takes the watercolor. Now, if you print black ink on a laser printer, watercolor will neither muddy that nor sit atop it. And so you can do printing. Same works for old Xerox machines. You can look at a lot of old Hugo Pratt artwork where he would do some inking and then Xerox it and then watercolor the Xerox. Pete Tamburino mentioned doing that as well. So I think that's a relatively, or at least not an uncommon practice. The downside with that is that the toothier the page, the more difficult it is for the ink to lay down. There are solutions that folks have proposed to this, such as ironing the watercolor paper beforehand and things like that, but it's increasingly difficult. And I also find that when I scan the watercolor pages, eliminating entirely the aspect that I don't have nearly as much control over traditional media as I like to. I feel comfortable working with individual images, but once I'm starting to work with a story, I get into an area that's uncomfortable for me. I like to do a lot of non-literal colors to convey scene changes. This scene is mostly orange, this scene is mostly green, this scene is mostly blue. And the character colors need to change to accommodate that. And that moves a little bit outside of my comfort zone. When I paint, I tend to paint very literally. Brown hair is brown, flesh tone is flesh, blue shirt is blue. And, depending on the scene, a blue shirt might need to be green or red or, some kind of gray. And it will look blue within the context of all this other stuff, but I have difficulty with the painting of that, but I can do it digitally. So there's that aspect that makes the traditional watercolors a little bit tricky. The other is that I can't scan it and get the levels to where I like. I have a good scanner, but when I adjust the levels and the curves and all that stuff to try and make the really light colors that I'm fond of using, a top white, as shadows or whatever it might be, when I bring those into focus, it muddies up around the line art, and the line art gets a little bit more chunky than I would prefer that it be. I really don't like doing ink work and watercolor work separately. and then assembling them later, because it doesn't permit me to see the value differences between the line art and the color, and it's important to me to be able to see all of what I'm doing at any given point, in order to achieve the final look that I'm eager to get. So I mentioned some of these difficulties on Facebook, and my friend Kyle Webster reached out to me. He's got a reputation, a well-deserved reputation, for creating the best digital brushes that have ever existed for Photoshop. And they're used by, hundreds and hundreds of folks, everybody from the people doing concept art, illustrators, or, everybody across the board, animators, comics people. And one of the things that he does is create brushes that can successfully mimic traditional media. And I mentioned to him having difficulty sort of figuring out which brushes would be which, and he walked me through recreating one of my panels that I had done traditionally, how to approach that digitally and which brushes to use, and limiting the number of brushes, because it's very difficult for me to jump back and forth between a bunch of brushes. And so he showed me how to use, 2 or 3, how to overlay a watercolor paper texture, just a huge variety of stuff. And for his efforts and his tools, I am, of course, hugely in his debt. He, is a real lifesaver. So I started working trying to make my stuff look the way that it looked when I worked traditionally, and I found that instead I could still convey that watercolor approach, but treat it the way I usually treat narrative. So what I did was go in and do sort of a flat base color on everything, digitally, without any concern for the watercolor aspect, and then go in afterwards with a couple of different brushes. The main one being the round 60, and turning on the color dynamics and shifting between my foreground and background color depending on the pressure of my pen, so that it had a little bit more of that muddy brush approach that I always get because I never clean my brush. And found that I was really, really happy with the effect that produced. Depending on whether the publisher uses matte paper or glossy paper, I prefer matte, but I know a lot of publishers sort of have a house look that they like to utilize. That's going to affect how I tweak this afterwards, but I'm still very happy with the look of this. The mud feels like mud. But the characters, I'm still able to control the degree to which they pop. I'm able to, add shadows and flushes to the cheeks and things along those lines. So, so I've gotten my 6 pages done. I was going to do 5, and then I ended up working backwards. Did the last 3, and then decided it needed more of an action opener. So I went back and did that. I also wanted to showcase the differences between how I would handle interior and exterior scenes by way of lighting and hue. And got that all done. Did a couple of character design things, and I met with my agent briefly. We had one of our on the con floor 10-minute meetings that we sometimes have, and showed him what I was working on, and we talked about waiting until after Labor Day to pitch, because chances of folks trying to cram in last-minute summer vacations are pretty high, and we want to make sure that anybody involved with the acquisition of this book is on hand to be a part of that process. So that is where we are now. I've sent him sort of a finalized pitch thing, along with sort of a cover letter talking about my thoughts on the series, on the genre, what it can touch on, what current issues that its readers might be dealing with will resonate through the work, I hope. And he's going to read through that and get back to me, and hopefully we'll move on to pitching within a month or so. So that's very exciting. I'm very invested in this project at this point, and I feel really good about it. I think it could be a book I could be really proud of, and I'm excited to get to working. So thanks so much for watching, and I will keep you abreast of further developments.